Right, thank you very much, Luke. So my name is Umair. I work for Digital. Today I'm going to be talking about theming with style components. So how many people here have used React or heard of React or want to use React? Oh, that's good. Okay, so we've got a good audience. Right, so we're going to start off with the code. So it's like everybody knows how CSS works, I'm guessing, hopefully. So when you code with CSS, you're writing abstract rules to take unknown content and organize it into an unknown medium. So essentially, you're talking to an API which sends you some sort of data, and you're trying to arrange it into a web page, right? So we most of the time don't know what the API is going to send us, what kind of content, how long it's going to be. So that stuff is hard. Like without knowing what's going to come in, you're trying to arrange something. So obviously, that's how things get complicated. So today we're going to talk about what CSS and JS is, what problems does it solve, what does it bring to the table. So this is basic. So we learn to create a website, we add HTML to it, nice, and then we add CSS to it, and then suddenly CSS is like, what? It's like everything just goes everywhere, and then you're struggling for 3 days trying to align your text or something like that. So what is CSS and JS and why? So web development has changed. Obviously, CSS was originally designed to style components, and the web was more of a document reader, as Andy said. The web pages were really basic, grayscale, and they were mostly text. But obviously now it's repurposed, and it's more of a web component based. So you've got different components for different things that do different things. CSS was just not built for it. It was not the solution that they wanted, but luckily we have things. CSS is great. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with CSS, but obviously the problems that come are morely inheritance versus composition. So you change one thing, and then suddenly something on the end of your website changes, and you're like, what? So that's the thing. So CSS and JS, what it does, it kind of unifies the best bits of CSS and JS and kind of like merges them together. So you have CSS interact directly to a component level rather than having a global scope. One thing you need to be sure of is CSS and JS is slightly different than it's a bit small. I don't know how to make it big. So it's different than inline styling. So a lot of people who write React, they know inline styling work. It just goes past the DOM, but it's slightly different. So what you do is, for inline styling, you do styles, background color, and then you just pass the style. Whereas for a style component, or CSS and JS, you still write proper CSS rather than a camel case. You do normal CSS styles. And this gets rendered onto the DOM. A style would get rendered in one line on every single element, whereas CSS would create a style sheet on top with a unique class name and inject it at the top of your head. Not your head, the HTML head. So, so what does it look like, right? It is a small demo. So you import style component. We're going to talk about style components. Obviously, you've got different flavors in CSS and JS styles. You've got style components, glamour, emotion. There's a new one, linear or something like that. There are like 100 more. So obviously, every flavor is different, but they're all mostly similar. It just depends. They've got very small things. So we're going to talk about style components. This is how it looks like. You just import style component, you define a constant, and then you render it just like any component. So again, the question is, why not we just use CSS or CSS modules like Sass and Glass and all those things? They solve a lot of problems as well, right? CSS is great. Again, it's got media queries, it's got hover effects, active states, focus states, all sorts of things. You've got nesting, so you can target div individually, like with child and stuff like that. And you've got animations. So keyframes are like really good for what they do. For so much less work, it does really good animations, which is quite nice. CSS is not so great when it comes to scoping. Again, it comes to co-location or isolation. The components are. How many times does it happen that you've removed a file or changed some CSS and something else on a completely different page has broken? Has anything happened to somebody like this? Thank you. Cool. So there are a few people, right? It happens. I don't think it's a fault with CSS or anything, but it's just how the nature is. So again, CSS and JS solves these problems, and it has a great theming support and everything as well. This is Max Tobias. This guy, he's the one who created style components. I had a chance to meet him at the React Amsterdam conference this year. This picture is got no relevance. I just thought I'd put it in. Right, so you've got CSS and JS. We're going to talk about style components, right? So what do they bring? They've got styles encapsulation. They've got mapping being CSS and JS. They've got dynamic styling. They've got element queries. So rather than targeting the media query or the viewport of the user, so rather than waiting for the user to change the browser window size, we can actually create an element and do a query on place on that. That's a very good thing. You've got full theming support, so you can theme components and the whole website pretty much very easily, your whole app. It's got a huge ecosystem, awesome style components. It's a website. It's got a list of bunch of great things that are there. It's easier deletion of CSS. Again, how many people have deleted JavaScript code from their apps or websites, but haven't deleted the website, the subsequent CSS from it? Okay. Anybody else? No? There we go. Two more people. Right?
Just leave the JS in there.
Yeah, just
solve the problem.
Yeah, everybody wants to, it's okay for you to delete JavaScript code, but you're not comfortable deleting CSS, and it's normal. It's just
I'm not comfortable.
Nobody deletes CSS. It's not how it works. And then obviously we've got existing JavaScript tools like dead code elimination and stuff like that, so we can use existing codes for them. Obviously now you've got CSS dead code removal or something, but obviously I think it's up to it. Okay. So we're going to walk through a style component. It's a very basic button. So you import style components from style components. You define a const button, and then you do. Notice that B is capital, which follows React's convention. So it's otherwise, if it's a lowercase b, then React passes everything to the DOM, assuming it's a DOM element. So that's why you have to keep it capital. Then you notice that there's this weird tick thing. We're going to talk about it in a bit. Then there's a background color, and these are legit colors. That's what's defined in CSS. And then you just return a button with hello world, and that just works. So what's those those big things? They're called tag template literals. So it's a new feature. Well, it's been there for a few years now, but it was introduced first in ES6, and it lets you define custom string interpolation, so you can write JavaScript inside your strings. For people who don't know, you can also call functions with them as well. So instead of if you call a function, you have to write a parentheses with a bracket, right? Instead of doing a bracket, you can also call a function with these. The only difference is that the arguments are passed in as an array inside these tag template literals, rather than a parentheses which just passes the arguments as how they are. This is a slightly more advanced example. So we import style from style components. We define a constant again, and then we've got suddenly pseudo selectors. It's like okay, and then we have an after state. This is where the power of CSS is, right? So it has all those selectors, all the media queries and everything, and then now we've got media queries as well. So we still keep all the best things about CSS. We're not losing anything from CSS. We're keeping how CSS works. The only problem that CSS has, which is the global styling thing, we're taking that thing out and putting it inside a component, so it only affects that component and it doesn't break the whole system. Right, so it's a little bit of a demo time. Let's see if this works. Usually doesn't work. Right, so this is a normal button, a theme button. So we've got themes. Again, we've got some styles here. Margin, padding, border radius, colors, and border. And then we've got an object called theme, which we pass into the theme provider. Notice if I change this to orange, suddenly changes the color of that button, but it doesn't touch the other button. Although they're both the same buttons, but this one's wrapped inside a theme, so that works, right? So what we're going to do, and then in here, we've got a function that returns props, and we take props themes of main. And then same thing, so if we define a new color called, let's say, secondary, and we give this gold, and then change this to so now you've got a suddenly gold button, right? But obviously you see this thing is a lot repetitive, so you just keep typing secondary everywhere. So let's see, so this is still a JavaScript file, so nothing's changed. So what we can do here, we can just define another const called, let's say, get color. And then we return, so that will take props. And then return props.theme. Okay, and then we just, instead of writing all of this thing, we can just get color, give this props here, and this works. Nice. And then since we're passing the whole props down, what we can do is we can just take out the whole thing and just call the function. So obviously the props are going to get injected automatically because that's how JavaScript works. So you can remove this. So now it's a bit more cleaner. We've written a normal function. So now if you want to change all the buttons to main, it's slightly more easier. And this is a normal JavaScript function. We haven't done anything fancy. It's just a const that's returning a property from an object, right? In here, if you can do whatever you want. If you want to change the background of your app based on the time of the day, you can do that, right? You know, nothing's stopping you, really. I don't see why you would do it, but you know, why not? So yeah, it just makes things a lot more easier, and it saves you, like, it lets you give power to your user again, or do whatever you want. It gives you the user. So again, how hard would it be if you want to attach class names based on, let's say, time of the day? It's going to be difficult, kind of swapping class names is easy, but kind of changing the styles is still difficult. So that was the demo. Again, so this is a small thing. I'm going to end this with the most important property of a program is whether it accomplishes the intentions of its users. So again, CSS is great. For a lot of people, it works, and for a lot of apps, it works. You don't need to change it. You don't have to do anything. It works, it breaks. But if it doesn't work for you, I'd say give it a try. See how style components look. I've got a few examples as well here. So something you can do is this is a blog, personal blog by this guy who works for React, Facebook, and works on the React team. So you see, it's got a basic theme, so you can just change the theme and everything. But you see, I've selected that words, and the page doesn't even re-render. So that's how cool this thing is, right? You're changing the whole app basically without refreshing the page. That's some awesome stuff. Again, this guy, Nicholas, he used to work for Twitter Lite. He was a senior engineer there, and then he left and joined Facebook, worked on Instagram team, and now he works for React as a main, like, one of the core teams basically. So he shared his analysis in 2018, a few months ago. So how Twitter's legacy desktop website is different, and so if I show this right, so it shows you here that the total versus unique declarations, we've got a width was defined 970 times, whereas it was only used 245 times. Same thing with height, and same thing with margin, same thing with padding. Color, look at this, 36 colors defined 1022 times, and the background color. Right? So this changed when they moved to CSS and JS. Now you've only defined width 25 times. Again, the same 25 times. Height, margin, padding. Color has 4 more reasons. I'm sure they will have their reasons for doing that. And background color is 31 versus 32. So these numbers are huge. Like it saves you from repeating yourself. It saves you from copy pasting the same thing and forgetting to change something at some places. These numbers are big. There's also so the legacy site was 630 kilobyte CSS per theme, whereas the PWA generates 30 KB. So that's 600 KB shaved off of a website. That's massive. But for people who've been doing performance, right, I'm pretty sure they will love this, right? And obviously that's how Twitter works, and we don't see any difference, which is a great achievement, at least for them. But this is what they've done, and obviously he went on and said a few more things, and then the heated debate started, and stuff like that. But obviously the facts are there. So yeah, that's something I wanted to share. Again, CSS is great. The only reason we put it inside of JS for me personally is because it gives you more power than what CSS only can do, and it's more easier for you to delete files. It gives me more confidence personally to kind of be able to, oh, you know what, okay, I'm not using this component, I can delete this, and I can delete the style as well, rather than having 630 kilobytes of CSS per theme. That's it, and if you don't do questions, but I'll probably not. I'll go back. Oh, and that's it from me. Thank you very much.